This current team is stacked. It's deep. It has wing depth. It has Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, Joel Embiid. We have a backup point guard, two of them that are very good backup point guards, two power forwards, Yabusele and KJ Martin. KJ Martin on a balloon deal. If he doesn't pan out, we can probably trade him and upgrade at the power forward position if we really need to. We can throw in other vet min contracts like Eric Gordon if that doesn't work out, and we'd still have Lowry and Jackson. Or if we trade Jackson, we'd still have Gordon. I mean, we have so much depth there, and I don't even have Jared McCain listed. I don't think Jared McCain's going to play at all. I mean, obviously, if someone gets hurt or we're blowing somebody out, he's going to get in the game. But as far as like important minutes, I really don't see him playing. Once we picked up Reggie Jackson, I feel like McCain's minutes, the Sixers felt that he wasn't ready for big minutes and that maybe he's a project for 1 or 2 years down the road. But he's not going to play. I just don't see it. Council, I'm really hopeful for him. Drummond, we know, is going to play a lot of minutes, especially in those games where Embiid sits, and which means Bone is going to have to be a serviceable backup big. And based on those runs, he looks like he can fit a type of player that the Sixers haven't had in a while. Someone who can go up and catch some oops, throw it down, block shots, just be active. Basically, be what we wanted out of Paul Reed, but a little bit more athletic. Um, and it's going to be really important in those Embiidless games. So I'm going to project the Sixers, and I know you all have been able to see it this whole time, but I think the Sixers, based on knowing that they win 68% of their games without Embiid, knowing that Embiid's probably going to sit 15 to 17 games because I know he and Paul George both want to qualify for NBA awards. Let's say none of them get any major injuries and they do end up playing 65 to 67 games. I think the Sixers win percentage with Embiid is going to be in the 70s. So I think the Sixers will win about 75% of their games when Embiid plays. I think when Embiid sits with this depth of this roster, I still think the team is going to win 60 to 65% of those games. So with that being said, let's say that boom, there's a part of the season where Embiid and Paul George are both hurt. That's the reason why I put this projection down. My calculations said that the Sixers were going to win. All right, so sorry I have this huge graphic with a bunch of writing on it. You might have to look real close to your phone, or if you're on a computer, hopefully you can see it all fine. This is a compilation of some of the best Sixers teams of the Embiid era. There were really only about one or two teams that I excluded, so here you can get a good look at that. Want to tell you which of those teams did the best with Embiid off the floor because Embiid has missed a chunk of games in almost every single season that he's played. So some of those teams were able to do well or fair without him, and then some of the teams did extremely well, like beyond normally well with Embiid out on the court. So the Sixers' record with Joel Embiid, excluding his first season, is 274 and 128. That is a 68.2 win percentage. And if Embiid were to keep that win percentage across a full entire season, the Sixers would win 56 games. If they were to win the average amount of games that Embiid has ever won in his career. If you were to take the best years of Embiid's career in terms of win percentage, in 2020, 2021, that is the year that we had Simmons, Curry, Danny Green, Harris, Embiid, Shake Milton, that lineup. That team had a 76.5% win percentage with Embiid on the floor. That is a 63 win season if he was healthy the whole year. He was not healthy the whole year, so they had a 68.1 win percentage, which was still really good, a 56 win trajectory, and they finished first in the East that year, and they ended up losing to the Hawks. The other really good Embiid season was last season. With Embiid on the floor, the Sixers won 79.5% of their games, which would have been equivalent to a 65 win season. So if Embiid were to play all of last year, the Sixers could have won 65 games if the percentage were to hold up. So what I decided to do was look at the Sixers teams that were positive without Embiid. So there were 2 seasons that the Sixers had a positive record without Embiid. That was the 17-18 season, the first good Sixers team. Ben Simmons, JJ Redick, Robert Covington, Dario, Embiid. We picked up Bellinelli and Ilyasova at the deadline. We had McConnell off the bench. That team won 57.9% of their games without Embiid, which isn't too crazy, but that was one of 2 seasons that they had a positive record without Embiid. Now, I think a lot of that was due to Ben Simmons and just having solid role players around him that can shoot the ball with Covington, Saric, Bellinelli, Ilyasova. TJ McConnell is a beast. They had Amir Johnson and Rashawn Holmes backing Embiid up, which is, solid at the time. So that team did pretty well without Embiid. The other team that did really good without Embiid was the 22-23 team. That's the team that had Harden, Maxey, Harris, Tucker, Embiid, Milton, Niang, Thibault. We traded Thibault for McDaniels. That was a really good team. The biggest problem there was the backup big, where we had Harrell and Paul Reed. But without Embiid, that team still won 68.8% of their games, which is 56 win trajectory without Embiid. So now the Sixers' worst win percentage. Sorry. The Sixers' worst win percentage with Maxey is 60%. So I know a lot of those games are with Embiid, and we saw what happened when Embiid went down last year. But the problem is there was no Harden or Paul George to pair up with Maxey last year when Embiid went down. That isn't the case. We saw that when Embiid went down and we had Harden and Maxey, or even back in the day when we had Ben Simmons, who was still able to carry the team without Embiid, the Sixers still won a good amount of games. So let's say that Embiid does miss a game and Paul George is still available. Maxey and Paul George should still be able to have a nice above 55% win percentage, especially with Drummond backing up Embiid and having Bona on the bench too. The Sixers should still be able to hold up without Embiid. So, Paul George on good teams always has between a 60 and 70% win percentage, which is really good. That's good enough for 49 to 58 wins. So, knowing all of that information, I think the Sixers are going to have their best chance to have a really good win percentage, even if Embiid were to miss all the back-to-backs, which would be 15 games. We have 15 back-to-backs this year, which means if Embiid doesn't play in any back-to-backs, the most he can play is 67 games. Let's say Paul George doesn't play in a lot of back-to-backs. He can still play in 67 games. If the Sixers decide to stagger it and not have both Embiid and Paul George out on the same days, and we're playing against a weaker opponent, I think we can still rack up a lot of wins, even not having one of those guys, with Maxey and the step he's taken, and the rest of the depth that we have around those guys. Caleb Martin, in some of those games without Paul George, him and Oubre are going to be able to score, 10 to 20 points, which is, probably going to be above their averages. We're going to have Reggie Jackson when Lowry has to play more minutes. Jackson's going to be able to be the backup point guard, or vice versa. We're now having two, solid power forwards who can fill in if we don't want to just do the wings lineup and we're playing a bigger opponent with Yabusele and KJ Martin. So this team, man, it's really good without Embiid, especially having Drummond off the bench. That's really important. We saw that in 21-22, Drummond was the backup center, and the Sixers started out really well that year. The problem was when we had to trade Drummond and Seth Curry to get Harden, we lost a lot of that depth. Paul Reed became our backup big along with DeAndre Jordan, and it just wasn't enough to hold when Embiid sat down. We couldn't hold on to leads. We lost a lot of depth there with that. I think that 21-22 roster, if Ben Simmons didn't decide to sit out and, complain and get traded, that roster would have been insane. They still won 62.2% of their games. And the year before, they won 68% of their games. I can't imagine us not winning a bunch of games with Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Tyrese Maxey, Danny Green, Harris, Embiid, Niang, Thibault, Milton. Maz wouldn't probably have played at all. We would have had Drummond to back up Embiid, and in those games that Embiid didn't play, Drummond starting and Paul Reed off the bench. I think that team would have been a championship team had Ben Simmons not sat out. So it's unfortunate that that all happened. I think the trade for Harden was the best move at the time, but it just sucks that if Simmons would have played, we would have had the more depth to compete and be able to win games. Whereas when we gave up Drummond and Curry for Harden, we lost that backup big and it really put us in a bind. So I think if we're looking at this roster, let's go back and start with 17-18. That team had a really good win percentage. I believe it was our second or third best win percentage of all of the Embiid era. That team only had Simmons and Embiid as stars, but I think the depth of that team was really good with Bayless, Bellinelli, Ilyasova, McConnell, um, and Embiid and Simmons were in their athletic prime, so that's why that team did so well. If they had a third star, they probably would have been able to beat the Celtics. But that was they were young. That was their first really deep playoff experience, and so it's okay. They lost. I think the Sixers kind of overreacted, and you can see the next year we traded away 6 players or 5 players, and then we brought back one, two, three, four, five, 6 players. That team that everyone's like the Sixers should have won that year did not have a training camp together. Jimmy Butler got traded about 13 games in. Tobias, probably 40 something games in, got traded to the Sixers. So they didn't have much time to mesh together. Mike Scott came in. Jonathan Simmons, we brought in we traded Markel Fultz for him. And then we also got Boban and Greg Monroe. Like that team just had so many guys that were just brought in mid-season and towards the end of the season that they didn't have much time to, learn all the plays or have good plays ran for them. Brett Brown was a young coach at the time, and it just, I think it's way easier for people to look back and be like, that team should have won. And based on like the roster and having Butler, Harris, Reddick, Simmons, and Bede, you can say yes, they could have won, but they didn't have all of the offseason and all the training and practices that all those other teams had. And they still took the Raptors to 7. I think they would have won if had they would have won that, they would have ended up winning it all, but we can only look back now. You can see that the best Sixers record was in 2020, 2021. That team had no trades. All they did was a deadline pickup. They had a whole training camp together, figured out the playbook. They came in, had the whole team all set, basically kept the same team the whole year, and you saw what happened with that. They were first in the East, and the only problem is they ended up losing to the Hawks. I think they didn't play Maxi enough. I know he was a rookie at the time, but if you look back, he was playing well any opportunity he got. And those minutes that ended up going to George Hill would have probably been better going off to a rookie Maxi. We saw what happened in the games that he had to play more. When Ben Simmons got benched, Maxi came in, was just putting up numbers. So that was a Doc Rivers coaching error why we didn't win that series, but Simmons folded and we saw what happened with that. I already talked about that 21-22 team. That team had a really good record, but I think the problem is they lost too much depth when they traded Drummond and Curry. Drummond was the best backup big Embiid ever had, and that's what makes me hopeful for this year is that we have Andre Drummond back, and we have depth, and we have Embiid and Maxi and Paul George. We have star power, we have role player power, we have players that can play different roles. So it's really crazy the potential that this team has. You can see in the 23-24 season, which was last year, that team had a pretty good roster, and throughout the year they acquired depth. The problem is, again, it's kind of like the 18-19 season where they brought all these different pieces in mid-season, traded a bunch of guys away. Covington and Melton both got hurt. Like, there was just a lot happening. A lot of people in and out of the door. We brought in Buddy Hield. Embiid missed more than half the season. We had Paul Reed as our backup, and he wasn't doing too well in the playoffs. So I just think that team last year, obviously with the Embiid missing a chunk of the year, and then all the injuries, and then all the trades in and out. I mean, it was insane that that team also, made it into the playoffs. They almost didn't make the playoffs. And now about this team. This current team is stacked. It's deep. It has wing depth. It has Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, Joel Embiid. We have a backup point guard, two of them that are very good backup point guards, two power forwards, Yabusele and KJ Martin. KJ Martin on a balloon deal. If he doesn't pan out, we can probably trade him and upgrade at the power forward position if we really need to. We can throw in other vetman contracts like Eric Gordon if that doesn't work out, and we'd still have Lowry and Jackson. Or if we trade Jackson, we'd still have Gordon. I mean, we have so much depth there, and I don't even have Jared McCain listed. I don't think Jared McCain's going to play at all. I mean, obviously, if someone gets hurt or we're blowing somebody out, he's going to get in the game. But as far as like important minutes, I really don't see him playing. Once we picked up Reggie Jackson, I feel like McCain's minutes, the Sixers felt that he wasn't ready for big minutes and that maybe he's a project for 1 or 2 years down the road. But he's not going to play. I just don't see it. Council, I'm really hopeful for him. Drummond, we know, is going to play a lot of minutes, especially in those games where Embiid sits, and which means Bone is going to have to be a serviceable backup big. And based on those runs, he looks like he can fit a type of player that the Sixers haven't had in a while. Someone who can go up and catch some oops, throw it down, block shots, just be active. Basically, be what we wanted out of Paul Reed, but a little bit more athletic. Um, and it's going to be really important in those Embiidless games. So I'm going to project the Sixers, and I know you all have been able to see it this whole time, but I think the Sixers, based on knowing that they win 68% of their games without Embiid, knowing that Embiid's probably going to sit 15 to 17 games because I know he and Paul George both want to qualify for NBA awards. Let's say none of them get any major injuries and they do end up playing 65 to 67 games. I think the Sixers win percentage with Embiid is going to be in the 70s. So I think the Sixers will win about 75% of their games when Embiid plays. I think when Embiid sits with this depth of this roster, I still think the team is going to win 60 to 65% of those games. So with that being said, let's say that boom, there's a part of the season where Embiid and Paul George are both hurt. That's the reason why I put this projection down. My calculations said that the Sixers were going to win 59 and a half games. So either 60 or 59. I'm going to build in some grace and say, there's going to be some point in the season where maybe somebody else gets hurt or the depth isn't there, or we just have like a really killer back to back time of the season. So I'm going to bring that number down a bit and say that the Sixers win 57 games, which is 69.5% of the games that they play. They're going to finish second in the East with Nick Nurse as their coach, and they're going to finish right behind the Celtics. The Celtics will win 60 games. I have the Sixers winning 57, the Bucks winning 55, the Knicks winning 54. So those are your top 4 seeds right there. Followed by the Cavaliers with 49 wins, the Heat with 48, the Magic with 48, and the Pacers with 47. I think that is how the season is going to pan out. I think I'm going to be really close to how it ends up finalizing. And then I just want to bring up the point that Nick Nurse, in those seasons with the Raptors, he won 73.6% of his games in the year after Kawhi left. That was a 60-win season the year after Kawhi left. They still were able to win that many games. That goes to show how good of a coach Nick Nurse is. In the year that they won with Kawhi, they had a 70.7 win percentage, 59 wins. So you're telling me with a 59 and a 60 win pace of a coach with this talented of a roster, there's no way that the Sixers shouldn't win close to 70% of their games this year unless there's, knock on wood, some really big injuries. I'm putting the Sixers at a 69.5% win percentage. That is locked in. They're going to win 57 games. If there are no major injuries, they're going to win 59 or 60 games. So, in the conference finals is going to be Celtics Sixers. That is my prediction for the year. I'm not predicting who's going to win. I'm just telling you that the conference finals is going to be Celtics Sixers. And it's going to come down to the coach that can outsmart the other because both teams are deep. I don't think either roster is that much more insane than the other. Obviously, I think the Celtics won. They have a better roster slightly, but they could have that, oh, we already won already. So they're not putting 110% effort. The Sixers players all have something to prove, which I think they're going to go harder for all those rebounds. They're going to play 110% at all times. They really want to beat the Celtics. They're tired of all the losses that they've taken in the playoffs to the Celtics and all the disappointments that they've had. So they're going to have a little bit more extra juice in there. So that's going to tell you where I think it's going to go. I think the Sixers are going to pull out. I think the Sixers go all the way this year. This is our year. We're going to win it all. Uh, we're going to face the Minnesota Timberwolves in the finals this year. So that's where I'm going. I'm probably going to be way off, but I think it was fun to do that. Check out the rest of my videos. I'm going to be putting out a lot more. And yeah, like always, like, comment, subscribe.